In the spring of 1967, while anti-war protesters filled the streets of American cities and journalists documented the brutal ground war in Vietnam, a radically different kind of weapon was being quietly deployed over the jungles of Southeast Asia, high above the triple canopy rainforest, beyond the reach of enemy fire and far from the eyes of the international community. US Air Force crews were conducting missions that would have seemed like science fiction just a decade earlier. They weren't dropping napalm or high explosives. They were making it rain, deliberately, strategically, and in doing so, they were crossing a threshold that humanity had never crossed before, transforming weather itself into an instrument of war. For 5 years, Operation Popeye remained one of the Vietnam War's most closely guarded secrets, a program so controversial that its eventual exposure would trigger international outrage and fundamentally reshape the laws governing armed conflict. By 1966, the Ho Chi Minh Trail had become an obsession for American military planners. This wasn't a single road, but a vast, constantly evolving network of jungle paths, mountain roads, and river crossings stretching nearly 1,000 miles from North Vietnam through Laos and Cambodia before snaking back into South Vietnam. American intelligence estimated that by the mid-1960s, the trail was capable of moving up to 20,000 soldiers per month during peak periods, along with substantial quantities of supplies. US commanders had thrown everything they had at cutting the supply line. The US military conducted massive bombing campaigns targeting the trail and other areas in Laos through operations like Steel Tiger, Tiger Hound, Barrel Roll, and Commando Hunt. From 1964 to 1973, more than 2 million tons of ordnance was dropped on Laos. They had seeded the trail with acoustic sensors, sprayed millions of gallons of Agent Orange in order to strip away jungle cover, but nothing seemed to work. The North Vietnamese adapted to every tactic with remarkable ingenuity, using thousands of laborers to repair bomb damage overnight, moving supplies on bicycles when necessary, shifting routes when one path became too dangerous. The trail had become a symbol of American military frustration. It was proof that superior technology and overwhelming firepower wasn't always enough. It was in this atmosphere of strategic deadlock that someone proposed an absolutely audacious alternative. Don't destroy the trail, make it completely unusable. Southeast Asia's monsoon season, running roughly from May through October, turned the region's dirt roads into impassable quagmires and effectively shut down large-scale military operations. The North Vietnamese had learned to work within this rhythm, stockpiling supplies during the dry season, but what if the monsoon could be extended, intensified, and targeted with precision? The technology to attempt this already existed. Cloud seeding, the process of dispersing substances like silver iodide or lead iodide into moisture-laden clouds in order to stimulate ice crystal formation and trigger precipitation. This had already been pioneered in the 1940s. By the 1960s, it had been tested in dozens of civilian applications across the American West. Now, that same civilian technology would be repurposed for military ends. The operational codename was Operation Popeye. The unofficial motto was "Make mud, not war." Operation Popeye officially commenced in March 1967, operated by the 54th Weather Reconnaissance Squadron flying out of Udon Royal Thai Air Force Base in Thailand. The primary workhorses were WC-130 Hercules aircraft, weather reconnaissance planes now repurposed to alter the very weather they had been designed to observe. These aircraft, along with F-4 Phantom jets returning from bombing runs, carried specialized canisters loaded with silver iodide and lead iodide particles. The operational procedure was deceptively simple. Aircraft would fly into promising cloud formations at specific altitudes and disperse the seeding agents using pyrotechnic flares or chemical generators. The missions were flown under extraordinary secrecy, compartmentalized to such an extent that many of the pilots and crew genuinely didn't understand the strategic purpose of what they were doing. The targeting was remarkably specific, focusing on critical sections of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, where enhanced rainfall would cause maximum logistical logistical disruption. River crossings, mountain passes, supply depot areas, and sections of road that would completely dissolve into bottomless mud. Between 1967 and 1972, the operation flew more than 2,600 cloud seeding missions. According to declassified military assessments, it achieved measurable results. Rainfall had increased by approximately 30%, which doesn't sound like a lot at first, but if you really think about it, it is quite a lot of rain. Anyway, rainfall had increased by approximately 30% in some targeted zones. This had effectively extended the monsoon season by 30 to 45 days in some areas. Roads that should have been passable became absolutely oversized puddles. River crossings had become raging floods, supplies had rotted in unrelenting damp, and the North Vietnamese had no idea they were being targeted by weaponized weather. They just knew the rains were worse than usual, longer than usual, and far more destructive than usual. The cost of this whole operation was relatively modest. The program cost approximately $3.6 million annually, with total program expenditures estimated at around $21.6 million over 5 years. This is trivial compared to the roughly $2 billion per month the US was already spending on the overall war effort. For years, Operation Popeye had remained hidden deep within the Vietnam War's classified operations. Then, in March 1971, investigative journalist Jack Anderson published a column claiming that the US military had engaged in rain-making operations over Laos. The Pentagon's response was swift and categorical, the same as always: complete denial. But Anderson continued investigating. The program entered the public space through a brief mention in the Pentagon Papers, the massive 7,000-page classified study of US decision-making in the Vietnam War that Daniel Ellsberg had leaked to the New York Times and Washington Post in June 1971. And then more extensively in a 1972 article in the New York Times by Seymour Hersh. Buried within thousands of pages was confirmation. The United States had indeed been conducting weather modification operations over Southeast Asia for years. The revelation didn't just embarrass the government for lying, it absolutely horrified people across the political spectrum because of what it represented. This wasn't conventional warfare as we know it. This was humans weaponizing fundamental natural systems, manipulating the sky itself in order to harm their enemies. It raised immediate and disturbing questions. If cloud seeding could be weaponized, what about other environmental modifications? Could governments trigger droughts, redirect hurricanes, or even cause earthquakes? The science fiction-esque scenarios that these questions evoked were terrifying precisely because Operation Popeye proved that they weren't entirely fictional. Senator Claiborne Powell of Rhode Island, chairman of the Senate Subcommittee on Oceans and International Environment, convened hearings that forced military officials to testify publicly about Operation Popeye for the first time. The testimony revealed the program's full scope: over 2,600 missions, 5 years of operations, and deliberate manipulation of monsoon patterns affecting 3 different countries. The Soviet Union, which had long harbored suspicions about American technological capabilities, became the leading voice calling for international restrictions on environmental modification techniques. But one has to wonder what the Soviet Union was up to during this point in time. Smaller nations, completely terrified at the prospect of becoming targets of weather warfare they couldn't defend against or even detect, joined the cause. Environmental organizations warned of cascading ecological disasters. The scientific community debated whether humanity even possessed the wisdom to wield such power responsibly. What made the international response particularly urgent was the fact that Operation Popeye represented only the most primitive application of environmental modification technology. Scientists were already theorizing about far more extreme possibilities: seeding hurricanes, triggering avalanches, manipulating ocean currents, and even attempting to induce earthquakes in seismically active regions. The prospect of an arms race in environmental weapons is genuinely apocalyptic. In this context, the United Nations moved with unusual decisiveness. Negotiations began in 1974 and culminated with the Convention on the Prohibition of Military or any other hostile use of environmental modification techniques, also known as a mouthful, or more specifically known as NMOD for short. The convention was approved by the UN General Assembly on December 10, 1976. The treaty prohibited the military or hostile use of environmental modification techniques having widespread, long-lasting, or severe effects. The convention was opened for signatures on May 18, 1977, with the United States among 33 nations signing at the ceremony in Geneva, and it entered into force on October 5, 1978, eventually attracting 78 state parties. Operation Popeye had been terminated in July 1972, but its legacy had fundamentally reshaped international law governing armed conflict. More than 5 decades after the last cloud seeding mission over the Ho Chi Minh Trail, Operation Popeye continues to generate uncomfortable questions that resist easy answers. The question of military effectiveness remains genuinely ambiguous. Declassified assessments suggest the program achieved its immediate tactical objectives, but measuring strategic impact is far more difficult. The North Vietnamese proved remarkably resilient to far more destructive conventional bombing campaigns. The ethical dimensions of Operation Popeye are far more complex though. Operation Popeye didn't directly kill anyone in the same way that bombing raids did. It just made it rain harder and longer. Yet, this very same indirectness raises profound moral questions about the weaponization of environmental systems that affect entire ecosystems and populations indiscriminately. The increased rainfall didn't distinguish between the military and civilian areas. The long-term environmental impact remains genuinely unknown. Did the years of cloud seeding cause lasting changes to regional weather patterns? Probably not. Did it contribute to flooding that destroyed crops and displaced civilian populations? Yeah, it did. No long-term comprehensive environmental assessment was ever conducted, leaving a lot of questions permanently unanswered, and most disturbingly, has environmental warfare actually ended, or has it simply gone underground, becoming more sophisticated and even harder to detect? The NMOD treaty contains a critical loophole, which I mentioned earlier. It only prohibits environmental modifications with widespread, long-lasting, or severe effects, terms that are subject to interpretation and nearly impossible to verify without international inspection mechanisms that don't exist today. Weather modification technology didn't disappear after Operation Popeye's exposure. It simply returned to its civilian origins and continued evolving. Today, cloud seeding is a routine meteorological tool deployed across the globe. China operates the world's largest weather modification program by a staggering margin, employing an estimated 37,000 people and maintaining a fleet of aircraft, rocket launchers, and artillery guns to seed clouds across an area roughly 3 times the size of Spain. The stated purposes are quite benign actually, increasing rainfall in drought-stricken agricultural regions, suppressing hail, and ensuring clear skies for major events. The 2008 Beijing Olympics successfully prevented rain during opening and closing ceremonies. The United Arab Emirates has invested hundreds of millions of dollars into cloud seeding technology to increase rainfall in one of Earth's most arid regions. Numerous US states continue operating cloud seeding programs aimed at enhancing snowfall in mountain ranges. The technology itself has advanced considerably since the 1960s. Modern weather modification employs sophisticated atmospheric modeling to identify promising cloud formations. It uses ground-based generators and aircraft-mounted equipment to deliver seeding agents with much greater precision, and experiments with new technology including nanomaterials designed to more effectively nucleate ice crystal formations. Yet these advances simultaneously make the technology more useful for civilian purposes and more potentially dangerous if repurposed for military ends. If cloud seeding with silver iodide canisters dropped from C-130s in the 1960s could measurably extend monsoon seasons, what might be possible with today's technology? The question isn't merely academic. I want you to consider computational power for a second. In the 1960s, weather forecasting relied on very primitive computers. These days, we have meteorological supercomputers. For example, China's Sunway Taihu Light, which operates at 93 petaflops. For perspective, a petaflop is equal to 1 quadrillion floating point operations per second. It's capable of modeling atmospheric dynamics at scales unimaginable 50 years ago, potentially identifying optimal intervention points where small modifications could cascade into large-scale weather changes. And this isn't even the peak of our computational capabilities today. Delivery mechanisms have evolved dramatically as well. High-altitude drones can operate at 60,000 feet for over 30 hours, dispensing seeding agents across vast areas without requiring air bases or even risking human pilots. I want to point out again that even if nations wanted to verify compliance with the NMOD treaty, the technological capability to detect modern weather warfare simply doesn't exist in comprehensive form. Operation Popeye was eventually detected because aircraft flew repeated missions which created observable patterns. And also because insiders eventually leaked information. Modern delivery methods could be way more covert. Atmospheric sensors could theoretically detect unusual chemical signatures, but the atmosphere is vast and constantly mixing. So you would need a global network of sophisticated sensors continuously sampling the atmosphere at multiple altitudes. This is an infrastructure that simply doesn't exist and would cost billions if not trillions to create. Operation Popeye didn't just make it rain. It proved that the environment itself could be quietly bent towards human objectives, whether those objectives are peaceful or destructive. And that was the very first episode of Anomalous Reports of the Unknown. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've got a lot more planned for the future. Some really crazy stuff. I can't wait. And I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for stopping by.